and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has made a New Year's resolution never to be captured onto a supervillain ship while roaming the galaxy.
Tim Longo.
You already broke it, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did it. You know, it was a minute after midnight, and I was like, "This is not going to happen."
Oh boy. Hey, speaking of which, do you have any resolutions you want to share?
I'm actually not a resolution person. I've come to find out about life, so I don't actually have any. No, do you have any?
No, I don't do it either. I think I used to when I was younger, but I haven't in several years. I am trying to make some changes, but I'm not resolving to do anything. It's more like I should maybe after the holidays lay off on the booze a little bit, that sort of thing. But nothing like I'm going to do this, this year or whatever. So just kind of it is a good time to take stock and kind of look back. So
yeah, I just feel like
do that
every day should be, you should be thinking about things to improve. So annually, I guess it is good to take stock though, but annually it's like, just do it anytime. You don't need to wait.
That's very true.
Although our wonderful gifts that we got from Aaron don't help you in the booze category.
No, it's after I was done with that. So
you were already done with it.
I brought it along and shared it with my family, so it wasn't I didn't drink it alone.
Good.
So thank you, Aaron, again for that. Anyway, let's turn back to games because I guess that's what we talk about here. It's been a while. We are continuing to play Anachronox. Part 3. I want to thank a couple people who stopped by on the stream. I streamed this on Saturday for like 10 hours, and then a couple hours more on Sunday to finish it up. So I want to thank, and I'll forget some people, and I apologize, but I want to thank Reverend Q. I want to thank Maddie Allen Eastock. I want to thank McKendy and Moss Neotech Proto, who's written into the cast before. Had a couple others, I think, in and out. Oh, Ryan, the stats doctor. Thanks for coming by. You were there a couple times too. So I appreciate everybody who stopped in, and those who didn't join in the chat. We had a good time. It was very nice to have company. And then when I finished early on Sunday, we played a different game and then played some Jackbox. So playing Drawful with people over the internet is a fun time. So we had a good time doing that for a couple hours.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, back to Anachronox, this crazy 2001 RPG madness that we've been indulging in for the last several weeks. Why don't you start with throw a dart at the board and pick among the weirder things that happened this time.
Well, we were talking in pre-show. It's just hard to this game keeps surprising me, and Brett brought it back around in pre-show, kind of bringing back up the TV metaphor and and Star Trek, I think was the example that he used. And it brought me back down to earth a little bit in my freak out over how many crazy things happen, because it is fairly episodic in its way that it handles things. But the first thing that we did in this session, after the last one, was we just had gotten that space starfighter from Democratus to go help them save the planet, as we do. And we're flying toward this Hive meteor planetoid of some kind because it was shooting missiles. And then the first surprise for me was basically going into this this mini game, flying the starfighter.
Right. An action sequence.
An action sequence that was, from a first person cockpit-ish perspective, and you're literally moving the mouse around and firing kind of Rebel Assault style, firing at things on screen with your mouse cursor and kind of navigating, there was a little descent feeling to it. as
That's a good
well.
callback. Yeah, for sure. I was trying to think because it does have the full 6 degrees
Yeah, yeah.
freedom,
I mean,
but
it gives you an
you
impression.
can't move, right? But
Yeah,
you are moved in 6 degrees of freedom.
yeah.
It's
You're
a
going
real
upside
shooter.
down and stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
It's a rebel
there
assault.
was sort of navigation that you had to figure out too, right? You couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So there were, as you came into different areas and defeated enemies there, you would be basically pointed at different doors, and if you shot them, you would go through them. Um, and at a certain point, I realized, oh man, I've been going in circles for a while because I was chatting with people and like, oh, this is fine, I guess. These things are actually, I actually got a lot better at the game because I spent some time circling around. But it was actually surprisingly tough to hit those small targets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no aim assist or anything.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, you're basically precision based. Yeah, and there's some landmarking and stuff, but I got lost a few times as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just another example of them just not holding back on that theme we talked about before, of them kind of just doing whatever comes to mind. It seems like they're like, well, this time we're going to go into the hive and we're going to shoot at some of the guys flying around, and they coded that up to do specifically that.
Yeah,
the navigation.
It's funny because we've talked about RPGs before, and it feels like normally RPGs are about abstracting away from player skill, and I wonder if part of the heritage of the developers of this game coming from more, right, because they're in the Dallas area, they're probably people who've worked on shooters. They've come from player skill based games. I wonder if they just had a hard time giving that up.
Yeah, well, or they wanted to do some sort of hybrid intentionally,
right.
that maybe when they would play a JRPG they would miss that. I mean, I actually feel like that was something we talked about with Final Fantasy that maybe we brought up. I feel like that is something that I miss sometimes from RPGs, and some of the ones that are doing more of the hybrids of that, though not always, the action sequences aren't always the greatest, and Witcher 3 comes to mind. They're not like the best third-person action game you're going to play, but the hybrid of that definitely keeps me interested in different ways than just a traditional RPG. I mean, I got to be honest, at this point, I feel like I have a hard time calling this an RPG, to be honest. I mean, it is one by the definition technically, you know what I mean? But I don't, at least the way I'm playing it, it's an adventure game, like It's got these special sequences. Pretty much every chapter has something like that. It has these mini games and stuff per character. And there's some of the tropes of character swapping and statistics and stuff, but we'll get it. I guess we can talk about a little bit more about some of the combat we've had.
We aren't
like
we aren't really making choices that matter on the narrative scale that like change anything about your character.
I'm not managing my gear enough to really.
Right, there's not a lot of loot management. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, those things are not. The loot management is definitely a bigger thing in the JRPGs, and that was something we talked a little bit about pre-show as well. It's just that Final Fantasy IX, you felt like you really understood going around and I'm going to hit all the vendors when I get to a new place because I want to make sure I've got the best whatever sword or wand or hat or whatever people need, all the different gear.
You're min-maxing, basically.
Right, min-maxing, but also maybe swapping stuff out based on the fact that, I've gone into a place where there's more poisonous things, so I want to use my poison bangle or whatever to prevent being poisoned, etc. And here it's definitely... You rarely get enough combat in an area to start to even get that feel like, I definitely want to have my fire whatever protection, for one thing. And for another thing, there's almost no especially offensive gear. There's more defensive stuff just because there's more slots. But basically, to power up your attacks, you have to find new guns or new whatever's depending on the character in the environment
stuff too,
and Mystech stuff. Although eventually we get to a point where we find this thing that you can plug bugs into to maybe create new effects. You got that, right?
I have
Elementorium or whatever it's called.
I have one, but I haven't used it yet. Is it a separate interface? I haven't. I picked
It
one
is.
up, I think.
Yeah,
but I've been using the Mystech powers quite a
didn't
bit.
figure out how to power that thing.
No,
and
I
how
haven't.
to. Oh, okay. Yes, that was an interesting thing to discover. So we can get to that, I guess. It's really not well.
Is it a separate interface then? Like, how did I miss? I picked one up on the ship, I think.
Yes, it's in your Fatima interface for the party.
Okay.
And then there's a once you've gone to her screen,
button there.
There's a button for whatever it's called, the Elementorium,
Elementor, I think.
Maybe the Elementor.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. And so there's a thing for that, and then there's a grid of like things that you found.
Yeah, I remember him explaining it when.
Yeah, he does. He explains it,
yeah.
Right. Grumpus explains it, and there's an interface that goes with that.
Okay.
But the funny thing there, and I discovered it far too late, and maybe too late for it to be of value in the game for me at all, because we don't have a lot left. And now I'm in another location where I can't easily get back to where to be able to go between the planets like we could before, I haven't been back to Bricks, but I could have. And now it feels like it might be a while before I can get back to Bricks again. So anyway, long story short, you power it by using the bugs that you find on those little bumps that are all over the world.
Yeah, I found some of those bugs too, yeah.
See, I didn't get that until I was on Rictus's ship, which we'll get to as well, the Grimacer. So I had no
bugs to use it.
So I had no bugs to use on it, and I hadn't basically. I mean, he had said that look at these little bugs, do this thing, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, but those bugs are in the library. Where do I get them? I didn't make the connection. So I don't know. I felt kind of dumb when I was like, oh, that's what Bugsy means.
Yeah, I found one individual bug that was just on the ground. I think it was on the ship, or maybe it was in the tunnels. I don't remember. But yeah, I didn't put two and two together that I needed to go into another interface. They don't teach you that kind of stuff that well, and it's such a uniquely different gear item that you haven't had to do that with anything else that I can think of.
No, you haven't.
It's basically a mini game you have all the time or something. Interesting. Right. Okay, well, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. Next time when I'm finishing up the game, I'll definitely try to go back and visit places and find all the different colors, because you need different colors as well. Different colors of bugs.
Right.
So it's a
I wonder
whole.
if the mounds are different colored. No,
they are.
Oh, they are.
The mounds are different colors. There are red ones. I've seen red ones, purple ones, white ones. There must have been some blue ones. There's like 6 different colors.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but they're all over the place. And there's no. It's not like a modern game in which there's a checklist of like, oh, you found them all in this location, you're good. It's more like go and climb everywhere and try to remember everywhere you went and see if you can find one, which is pluses and minuses.
Well, and then I think the other trick to that is kind of based on when you get it, which we'll get to in a second on Hephaestus, that it's late enough in the game where I feel like kind of to what end, I don't know, maybe we have enough left that you will get to use it more, but going all the way back to the bricks and really scouring for those bugs, though it'd be interesting to see what you can do with them. I'm wondering how much you'll get to use it, to be honest. I don't know. But then
I wonder
we fight the queen, just to keep moving on at the end, right? Another big boss, which we have quite a few more bosses in this session than we've had in the last one.
Yes, we have. I liked the queen battle quite a lot. It felt dramatic and cool. I'm not really sure that insects lactate, so I'm not entirely sure about the character design, and I commented on that on the stream. Although other than that, I actually really like that enemy design, the big purple background of the I guess there are wings or something, and then the multiple legs coming out, and the head being laid back. It was kind of an interesting insectoid enemy that could have ended up being more like the alien queen in Aliens or something like that, because typically games draw from that as an influence. And even though it has similarities in that it's this hive, it's basically a bug and reproduces with insects. I mean, with eggs. It didn't feel ripped off from anything in particular. So
yeah, no, it was just the kind of macro trope of insectoid aliens, But
right.
They did,
the thing it reminded me, I guess, of was Soul Reaver had a boss that was a little similar.
Thought of the same thing. Yeah, I mean, in general, I think we should mention a little bit. I don't think the game handles female character design very well overall, and I think the Queen is another example of that. It's definitely a product of the time, unfortunately, and we're still in it to some degree. But yeah, so the Queen, we defeat the Queen, and really this kind of builds up to one of my favorite things in the game so far. I think probably yours too, because what you end up doing is you end up saving Democratus as a planet. And we talked a lot about that last time because we were in Votown and all that stuff, and we talked about how the planet works and all that stuff, and then you eventually get back to Sender Station to regroup, and who shows up in the lounge but Democratus the planet?
The planet, it's just there,
who has shrunken itself. By democratic vote, of course, they voted to shrink themselves to come and repay the debt of us for us saving the planet, and offers to join the party.
It is among the stranger things that has ever happened to me in a video game.
It's the best party member of all time. I mean,
it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I had a lot of people. I had people in the stream going, every time I would get Democratus would be hit in combat, going, "Oh man, there goes another 100,000 people."
And the sound that I specifically wrote a note down for the sound that it makes when it gets hit. It's just like a few of the guys, on the council just going, "Ah," It's just such a funny. It's just, yeah.
It also has the weird mini game when you use its power.
Oh my goodness, it's so great.
Whack-a-mole, and they're all they're all standing up, and you have to basically smack them down to get unified behind a single idea. You have to basically play whack-a-mole with them.
You're in Congress and you're yelling, talking.
Yeah, they're standing up,
people down. Yeah.
Very strange. In order to use their tractor beam, basically, which is its own thing. And then of course, we'll get to the big reveal later as far as Democratus goes.
Right.
But yes, I still really can't wrap my mind around this game sometimes, because we were talking about the tone management and the Star Trek kind of episodic and being able to have different tones and things like that. And I guess what they did over the first half of the game is really establish that, okay, you're going to have different sorts of things going on and kind of find that rhythm of, like, you're basically going to play segments of a couple of hours or so, and then the tone's going to shift again. And you're going to do something different thematically or tonally. And I think that's fine and great. I actually think it's really hard to sustain a tone for more than a couple of hours. Like, directing a film is about maintaining a particular tone for that period of time. And there's a reason why movies aren't 6 hours long.
And there's a consistency with that.
Exactly. Right. In a movie that should be fairly consistent, unless thematically you are actually directly want to shift the tone, and that's part of your message of the film or whatever. But then you're not going to have 100, you're going to have maybe 2. So you're typically looking at 1 or maybe 2 tones in a film Typically, you might leaven something dark with humor, and you kind of have that, even grim humor. But here, when you're changing the tones every couple of hours, I guess I'm now at the point where I have no idea what to expect narratively from this game.
Yeah.
Because as it's gone on, it's gotten crazier and crazier. I mean, it was weird enough meeting basically a magic dwarf in the first few hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of a sassy talking black scientist later. And I was like, okay, this all feels kind of a piece. It's not too far out there, but now we have a planet. So I just don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to that theme we talked about before that I'm starting to really love about this game. There's really just no shackles, right? Like they just decided to, yes, they have that structure of maybe that TV structure where every section is its own episode. And so they feel the freedom to go wide because of that structure. But also even when they choose to go in a certain direction, they've given themselves the freedom to, do whatever that comes to mind, I guess. Like we're going to do the Hive section. Let's do a mini space shooter section where we're actually going to fire lasers and, you're going to move your crosshairs around and okay, let's do that, and then let's have a mini game where you actually, are trying to talk down, Congress people and okay, let's do that. Every mini game's its own little thing. They even have, they recreated some in, which we'll get to in a second. When you get to Hephaestus, there's an arcade you find, and they have arcade games that actually.
All right, you can play a couple games, yeah.
So it's just like they had fun. Clearly, it's like a labor of love, in that they had fun just kind of making whatever came to mind. They made it. It seemed like, which is really, it's liberating to know that a team went that far.
So my question for the stream, and now my question to you is this a sort of game? Could we do this today?
No, that comes to my mind a lot because how many games can we think of right now, modern games that have come out recently that intentionally don't have a consistency of tone and theme? You'll find ones that stick, with humor, or they'll experiment with certain things, but I couldn't think of any. I thought of that same thing.
The only one, the one I thought of a little bit was What Remains of Edith Finch.
I haven't played that yet.
Yeah. So that's I think it's a PS4. Yes, it's definitely a PS4 title. Maybe also on PC. I can't recall. It's by the people who did The Unfinished Swan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it has a narrative through line. So it's not entirely as off the wall as this is. It doesn't go quite as broadly. But it is episodic within a framing story of this one family and how they all fell to the family curse, basically. And each section has different mechanics to some degree.
Are they
to a wide degree, actually?
Are they as surprising as this game is, and as diverse?
Unfortunately, I think the most surprising one happens earliest. They are pretty diverse, but the one that I found most surprising and compelling, I feel like, was the one they spent the most time on, and I think it's the first one. I'm pretty sure. But there are some similarities. There is a comic book section, for example, that reminded me of this game. There is, and there are definitely different mechanics. Some of them are very short, and so the mechanics don't need to be particularly deep. It is tied together, like I said, because it's all this family and family history and all of that. But it's close. It's close, and that was a well-regarded game this past year. So, and one I would recommend. It didn't entirely stick the landing for me at the very end of the game, but I see why it did, why it made the choices it did.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. Yeah, I mean, So I mean,
it's the closest I can think of.
Yeah, well, and I feel like what maybe we get more of these days is you have a really top-notch indie studio who does this with each of their, like, picks something with each of their games and goes live with it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
sure.
I'm thinking of like
Flambeer is a great example.
Flambeer is like the best example, or the their name is escaping me, the guys that did Year Walk and
Beat Sneak Bandit and games.
Year Walk. Yeah, and then what's that?
Device 6.
Device 6, yeah. So like when you look at Year Walk and Device 6, right? Like same people, same team, but very different.
I think
games.
Simogo, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you get some of that.
True. That's true, and it's a lot safer to do that because if part of it fails, it doesn't all fail, right?
Yeah, and I feel like in the blockbuster game space, that's where the blockbuster starts hitting it, you know, and kind of eroding on the ability to be diversely creative in that way. And so the other way that I was asking myself a similar question to that as I was playing, because I know that there's a bit of because there's a cult following, and because we've heard this game ends with a cliffhanger, and we can kind of talk about that in a second, because we can kind of see that coming, because they've set up a pretty big mission that you have to go on to save the universe, and we're definitely not going to get to it in time. Is, you know, if someone were to do a sequel to this game, which technically could be possible, like how would you? It would have to the quality would have to be top notch. It'd have to be pretty high quality game, and to do it justice to this with this much diversity would be very challenging even from just a production perspective. To make it, to not water it down, and to make it, I don't know. I just think it'd be a hard.
I agree with you. I mean, I think there are other things that make me think about this a little bit, like Far Cry 4, I guess. Even though it's a first-person shooter, there are, and I am crossing over a little bit with Far Cry Primal in my brain. There are different mechanics that happen, and then there are occasionally missions that are really out there. There are drug-infested missions where there's this badly written pair of bros who are getting as much, I don't know, opium or whatever they can get out of this country. And occasionally they give you their new wacky cocktail of drugs if you do their missions. And those are pretty strange sections. I would say that Far Cry 4 and Primal at the AAA level have probably pushed this the furthest. And they can probably do that because there's so many games in, right?
Yeah, with their missions maybe. But I mean, is it the case with those examples? Because I haven't played either of those. I apologize. But is it the case that is that really more of the missions that you're going on? But I mean, as far as like the mechanics and systems and mechanics, they're still using. I mean, those are
they are games where they are and they aren't, because in particularly in these drug missions, your abilities may change. In Far Cry Primal, I feel like there are missions where you are actually occupying a different animal. So you're an elephant or a mammoth, I guess, in one section, telling the story of the mammoths. And in another section, you might be the saber-toothed tiger, I feel like. That. So there are sections where there's a section where you're flying because you've left your body and you're in a owl or something like that. And please don't write in with specifics, because the specifics don't matter. I'm just saying that while you do these missions, they are fundamentally different mechanics.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I mean,
and it feels episodic as well. It's just a little less tied together because you can do them in any order. And here, right, the very optional nature of doing many of those things, or even just do them in whatever order, kind of takes some of the force out of them, in a way that this doesn't, right? This, because you have to, because it's the through line of the story. have to go and do all these things. It has more force and more. It also requires more of the developers to make all those sections work for every player. So,
yeah, I mean, maybe with some of the rise of successful episodic games here and there with Telltale and a few of the others, Life is Strange and things like that, maybe that's the structure that could work in a modern day context where each episode isn't afraid to go in a very different direction and have fun with it. Maybe Double Fine could do something like that. You could see a studio like that maybe doing a pretty top-notch version of it. But it's like, this is, we talked about this, I think, earlier on. This is such a space opera in a lot of ways too. And then there's still aspects of it that remind me of a humorous Mass Effect kind of game. I would want it to be maybe not as that grand of scale, but I'd want it to be of a scale that it was like it was at the time that it came out. You know what I mean? Like I would want it to elevate to that same, multiply by that same amount from a production standpoint to do it justice. Like if someone did like a lower fidelity version or something, I don't think it would. I don't know. The sequel in my head, at least, that's what I was thinking about a lot of. What would the sequel? How would we make this today?
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The other side of it is that I just don't know how marketable it is, which is the unfortunate part of it, right? Like, how do you get the funding to do a thing like this? Because didn't you say that Square owns the IP now because of IDOS?
They do, right? Because it's IDOS. Yep.
And they've offered people could pitch any of their IPs that they have kind of in the back catalog. So technically somebody could do it.
I would think so. IDOS, or rather Square IDOS, or whatever they're, Square Enix, they have in the past sought pitches and things for their properties.
Mm-hmm.
Back a while. So I mean, it is something that I guess is a theoretical possibility, if a wild unlikelihood. It's not impossible. Unlikely, but not impossible. So,
but replicating, I think
you would really want some of the original team involved, though. To be
that's what I was going to say.
Where was this going?
The hard part is replicating it. Yeah.
It'd be very, very difficult to do that. I don't know. Maybe if you had a big team of programmers that could give you all the different mechanics. It's hard to say. I don't know. Maybe. All right, let's so
where do we go after the Hive?
After the Hive, we go back to Sender Station, through Sender Station, and we go down to the red light district.
Yes, right.
And somebody on the stream was quipping with me that I think you can basically choose to go to Hephaestus first.
It seemed like you could, but
it seemed like you could. Well, and the person on the stream was like, "So here's your choice: you can either go down to this steaming lava place that probably smells horrible, or you can go to the red light district."
Yeah.
I wonder what the stats were on players who went to Hephaestus first. I'm thinking not too many. One of the things that happens here is that you see the power of some of their gating, because you've come back to a place where you couldn't go there before, and you require Ro Bowman's ability, the analysis ability, to unlock that next area. So I thought that was good. Yeah, they also leveled up the pipes, the mimic pipes or whatever that you fight, mimics. Those were harder this time, and I was annoyed.
I think I forget what the other creatures you fight are there in there, but they are also
the Grimokers, whatever. I forget what they're called.
Yeah, but you could go deeper down and find the sign that points to the. There's so just lowbrow humor occasions so many times in this game, but the sign that points to the red light district that's supposedly quote unquote hidden and kind of black market is the pumping station. I don't know if you noticed that. But
Oh, nice. No, I didn't.
pumping station is over to the right, and go that direction. And not
Nice.
a fan of some of the. But I think the big significant thing that happens in this section, though, is we are introduced to a new character.
We are.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, it's the character I've been waiting for so long, and that is because of her name, which is Stiletto Anyway, which is just the best. In fact, I've already forgotten what her other name is.
Sarah.
Oh, Sarah. Okay. Yeah, right. Sarah, because I kept saying it like in Outlaws. Sarah.
Yeah.
Went on the stream, whenever he would say Sarah, I'd go, Sarah. Yeah, so it's a pretty interesting section. You find her in a strip club basically, and she does a dance which is quite involved. There's a
very elaborate introduction.
A lot
for
of
this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely, way more than I expected for sure. And then at the end of it, she kills these 3 or 4 dudes who are Vendetta's henchmen, and then disappears again. So, and I guess she maybe meets up with you at the bar at that point, so you can go and find her.
Well, when you
you
have
have
solo
to
mission
do
as
the mission at
Pal,
that. Right.
Yeah, once you do that solo mission,
you take that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she follows Pal back, and her ability is weird. As a side note, she can throw coins at switches that I guess I've seen those switches before, but I'm not sure I know where any others are. I could not actually successfully achieve that ability, though. I don't know if
that was the most difficult. It took me many tries, but I did do it.
What happens?
You basically have to perfectly line up these bullseyes. They're square, but they're basically bullseyes, and you have to basically line them up perfectly. What it does is open a door in the environment.
Oh, okay.
So you get some stuff. Yeah, you get some stuff but from the first one, it was like, oh, okay, you can get a, you can get a heel grease plus and one other thing. And I was kind of like, oh, that was fine, I guess. It was more like, oh, this is what you get a camera cutaway to, this is the door that opens, so you can figure out where it is, and you can then go there and get the gear that's inside. I don't remember that gear being particularly interesting. I do feel like I did miss an opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to go to different locations after this one or the other of these sections, either Sender Station or Hephaestus, before going to the next Limbo. Was it called?
Wait,
is that right?
Which one? Hephaestus?
Well, where we were headed after Hephaestus when we got caught by.
Oh yeah.
I think it was called
Limbus.
Limbus, yes, that sounds right.
I think it's Limbus.
Yeah, so I felt like I should have probably spent time to go and do that, but I knew that we were biting off a big chunk here, and I felt like maybe I'll kind of try to move along.
I didn't do a lot of side stuff this time because we had so much to play. I mean, technically you could though, right? Like it's sort of all accessible as long as you're in Sender Station. You can go back to any place you need to
go to anywhere else,
which is impressive for this time for sure, as well.
Yes, and I've been curious about it. I feel like I missed an opportunity there, but I really had no idea how much more I had to play just to do the section that we had. Yeah. So we go from there. We do the bit with Pal, which I mostly liked. He breaks into the museum basically to get this thing. It's pretty funny because they're all planning like what they're going to do, and they're all looking at the plan, like, oh, the blueprints of the place, and but this would happen, and Pal just goes off and does it, which I really liked.
Well, and I also like that they cut to his perspective, and you get to see his screen, right. And he's kind of like assessing. They have like a little digital readout of him assessing the situation, and then it ends with
sort of like the Terminator. Yeah,
like Terminator, and he says solo mission required or something, and it's like, well, I'm just going to go do this.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to mention structurally that has frustrated me about the game, and it's a really tricky. I mean, it's really easy to mess this up. It's a tricky design problem, but you've been to all these areas before, and so when you return to Center Station, the first time I was at Center Station, I actually tried to do a bunch of stuff with Pal in the museum because there were all the clues in visual language, was there to actually communicate that I was going to be using him in there, but that wasn't the time to do it. And so I kind of got stuck a couple times in that first visit because I thought I was doing something wrong. And then it turns out I was on the right path. It just wasn't the right time.
Yes.
Come back later as him in this section, and they have that happen quite a few times where there's this out of order operation where and this kind of goes back to the Ron Gilbert thing I think we talked about before, but you see the lock before you have the key or the opportunity to actually use the key multiple times in this game, and that can be tricky and frustrating sometimes.
Right.
Another example is the one
you mentioned that I had that same frustration. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm, yep.
Because I was convinced you could get through that door the first time we got there. So I was trying to do a bunch of different things and kind of came back a couple times with different items and stuff, and then like you said, you get the key, which is Roe Bowman, but that's later, and you would not have known that. So anyway, quick mention.
Yeah, that is what I had thought was that was them doing something titillating, like, oh, there's a red light district, and then not letting you do it.
Yeah, right.
So that's how I read it when I wasn't able to do it. I was like, oh, okay, this is just them teasing us. We went all the way down here, and it's sort of a intentional dead end, and that's just how I read it.
Sure.
And then when I came back and was like, oh no, you really are going there, and then how crazy that was. It both was funny because I had written that off, and so it was funny to be like, oh, I can go down there, but then it was so outlandish, and like you said, fairly lowbrow. A lot of sexual double entendres that were kind of amazing. They
didn't hold back.
They really did not. This is a mature game at that point. Yeah. So anyway, it was surprising and then kind of funny how far they went with it. That's another thing I think that you would have a hard time getting away with today. But I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, if you call it out, maybe. I'd like to think we could still do it today, but I want it to not maybe be as lowbrow in some of the stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah.
The other important thing I want to quickly mention that happens around this section before we get to Hephaestus is Roe describes her theory about what is going on from a quantum physics person. I don't know what
more or less
science is that.
Astrophysics, maybe.
Astrophysics, yeah, of just
temporal physics,
multiple universes, and the Big Bang theory repeating itself and contracting and expanding universes, and how the previous universe before ours. Let's see. No, I'm going to get this wrong. The universe after ours, chaos and order are fighting, but then chaos has come. Order has thrust chaos into our universe, and so chaos is trying to get to the previous universe in the cycle to eliminate all universes in the future. So
chaos basically wants to go back far enough to stop order from being able to do anything to chaos, basically by preventing the previous universe, the universe prior to ours, from
existing.
Right, but from that thing failing to contract, basically. And it has to do with stealing mass from one to the other or something like that, which is true if at least theoretically true, that if there's enough mass, you need a certain amount of mass for the Big Bang to eventually contract. Right? We're still accelerating away due to the explosion. This is a true thing. The universe is getting bigger in our own real world universe. So this has some basis, right? It's pretty interesting that way.
Yeah, I was impressed that they thought this through as much as they did.
Right, and when they talk about dark matter, what they're talking about is the amount of matter that needs to be there for the contraction to occur at some point. Otherwise, what happens to a universe is that it spreads out, things get further and further and further apart, and literally everything gets further apart, to the point where the distance between molecules becomes too enormous, right? And it just spreads infinitely. And nothing can really live in it. It's a dead universe that is of more or less infinite extent. So, hello, physics undergrad here. So that was a really interesting thing, because I just recently read some science fiction books that had sort of some stuff that touched on this as well. So it's kind of been an interesting conflux of cultural touch points that they're touching on this thing at once for me. It's definitely setting up a big aha moment that's going to happen later, and we know from other readers or other listeners that this is a game with a big old cliffhanger that of course will never be resolved, one assumes, unless somebody does pitch Square Enix on an update to this game or continuation of this game. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was neat to lay all that out there.
Yeah, and I as an exclusively a science fiction person, not a science person as you are, it was just nice to have them within the context of this crazy game actually thought through a little bit how the macro sort of theories of this stuff would work, for the sort of the forces of good and evil, and how they're using actual theories out there. Maybe it was a zeitgeist of the day or something. I don't know if around 2001 was there something happening that would have been on their mind
that I know of, but and of course they tie in the Mystech to this as well, where Mystech is
that extra matter, right, or something?
Extra matter, right? Yeah. Exactly. So yeah. Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, so it adds in a weird way a little extra weight, no pun intended, to what you're doing, to be honest, right? Like in this zany, wacky thing, and when Sly Boots is joking about saving the universe, he's saying it in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way and kind of, puffing up his chest a little bit. But he actually, there is something going on there. And I just was surprised that they even, would describe it at all. And then finally understanding why the save system, the save menus say save universe, restore universe, and new universe. I didn't understand what, I could guess, but it actually has a direct application to what's happening, and I think that's another nice little joke that's thrown in there, just even in the UI. So that's pretty funny.
No, absolutely. It talks to team cohesion or a really, really specific vision when you have touches like that, right? Mm-hmm. When people are bought into the ideas behind your game, they find ways to make those things pay off in everything that they do. And here I think you have a UI designer. And maybe it wasn't the UI design, but somebody at some point said, "Oh, we should make these things. These should be new save and restore universe, right?" And that just is nice. And who knows? It might well have been from the top, but it does feel like there's an animating spirit behind the whole game from that standpoint. So that I appreciate, and I think any team that can achieve that is really kind of in the groove. It makes you really sad that they weren't able to do another game, to be honest, because it feels like they were locked in and the next one would have been even more interesting. So,
Yep. So what, basically after that we go to Hephaestus, right? Which is a whole big section. Trying to think of the best quick hits on that section that we should talk about.
The best stuff was the mystery, running around to talk to all these different people to figure out who stole these 3 keys.
Yeah.
Which ended up, they took you in and out of the place. They were going to kill you, basically. And they said, well, we won't kill you if you solve this crime because you're a detective. And it's like, oh, okay. It's a good thing I'm a detective, I guess. And you basically run all over the place. It was kind of amusing how everybody's spread out and you see a couple of your party members wandering around in the area. You basically can't interact with them.
Yeah.
They basically brush you off. But then you need one of them to actually finish the mission, so you have to go find them and say, hey, I need your help. You used Democratus for that, which is funny. I used Roe Bowman. I thought that was a funny thing.
And I actually tried to use Grampus, whatever his name is, first, and the game forced me to use Democratus. I would have Democratus anyway, but he said, why don't you go use Democratus? They're trying to, I forget what he said, something funny about giving Democratus more adventure or some sights to see or something. So yeah, that little sequence where there's another little interesting custom sequence where Sly is distracting Sister Angela at her front door and kind of like, making some chit chat so she'll be distracted.
See, you keep saying Sister Angela there, and for me that was definitely somebody different.
Oh yeah, no. I wonder if that's right. They've randomized other things in the game.
They've randomized other things, so I'm starting to think that I know it was not Sister Angela for me. She was part of the investigation, but that door, it was some
the door with the candle in front of it.
Yes, the door with the candle in front of it, but it was a different character. So I bet that's randomized a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, and they've done that a couple of times, right? It's maybe so people can't compare notes as easily. I don't know.
I don't know the point of that. It seems like extra technical effort for little benefit, to be honest. But
yeah, agreed. No, it doesn't make any sense. No, not necessary. We know now that we wouldn't need to do that, maybe. But the most hilarious part of that is while you're distracting that character, the other character goes out on the window ledge, goes out the window, and sneaks into the room while they're distracted to find the clue you need. And in my case, it was a planet sneaking on the ledge of the window into the back. And, and there's Democratus, the planet, sneaking into the room, hovering around looking for the letter that you need.
One of the most unlikely thieves you'll like.
That's the best. It may end up being the most memorable moment of the game for me, just because I couldn't believe it was happening. And they solved the mystery, and Sister Angela had no idea a planet was in her room, right behind her, stealing a letter.
Man, yeah, it's a pretty strange thing. It's pretty great. And then,
the other theme on Hephaestus that we should mention is turning basically this weird. They have a little bit of a message, I feel like, or some commentary with each of their sections or some of the sections. I really liked Votown because of that, but in this one you have this weird merger of religion and marketing, and they've turned part of Hephaestus into a theme park, essentially, around Mystech and the religious sort of aspects of Mystech. They're selling T-shirts, and there's a roller coaster. Unfortunately, you don't get to see the roller coaster, but and I mentioned the arcade earlier. It's just, and the music is zany and kind of wacky in that section, and a little bit of commentary of sort of that.
A mix of the sacred and the profane.
Yeah,
the commercialization and the
marketing religion, which I thought was a little interesting, little kind of tidbit.
There's probably something else, right? We have an email that talks about the electoral college stuff that we talked about last time, so we'll get to that in the feedback. So I feel like there probably was also something topical in 2000 or so that would touch on this as well. And then from there we go underground. We fix basically their big machine. Neither of us
talk about that section.
Yeah, neither of us particularly cared for it. So we're not going to dwell on it. It was fine. It was a little. I found it easy.
Switch puzzle with confusing tunnels with no map. So
yeah, exactly. A map would have helped there. Which is also something that came up in my stream. And then finally, we get back to Sender, and we're off to go to somewhere else important, which is Limbus, which I guess is maybe the intersection of the two universes or something like that. It's something important like that.
They say it's a planet of the dead or dead planet or something. So there's some theme.
We'll see what happens there.
Or we may
but
not.
On the way, what happens? Yeah, we don't know. On the way, what happens?
Well, we get gobbled up by an enormous spaceship that turns out to be owned by a supervillain from a comic book universe, Krapton Comics, which is owned by Rictus, who's the supervillain. It turns out
the ship is owned by Rictus. Yep.
The ship is owned by Rictus. The ship is the KSC Grimacer. I don't know what KSC stands for.
Probably Krapton Space Engine. I don't know.
Yes, yes, something comics or maybe. But anyway, yeah. So we're thrust into this. Apparently, there's real superheroes in this world, and they they created comic books based on these heroes. And so Sly Boots is all excited because he recognizes Rictus's ship and his grimace that is seen in every door in the place.
Yes, that's true.
And the iconic purple colors or something. So he realizes essentially they've been captured by this fictional but real supervillain, and is kind of excited.
And they actually switch the storytelling a bit in that they have panels that they're panning across and having different camera angles on. It gets very comic-y very fast. It's like suddenly the storytelling of Max Payne dropped into this game just for this one section, which was I just was sitting here laughing at how absurd that I didn't. Like, that's why I literally have no idea what's going to happen next in this game at this point.
It's another one of those.
How'd you do with the puzzles in this game? In this section. I was a little worried on your behalf.
Yeah, well, I have to admit, with the hologram puzzles, I looked them up. I got to those and I was like, well, so when I got to each of the monitors, I tried to kind of take note of what the holograms were there, because I assumed they meant something. But this is again that order of operation problem where it's like you don't know what the meaning or value of a clue is going to be until after, right? Usually you want to be presented with what you're looking for somehow.
Yeah, I went running all the way back and figured out.
You did, yeah.
I kind of worked out that it had something to do with that. And then I made little drawings of the holograms on my piece of paper that I was taking notes on, because I didn't want to write out what they were supposed to be. I mean, occasionally I'd be like, okay, here's the thing that looks like a lava lamp piece on this one, so that it will help me figure out what
pretty rough though. I didn't have enough time to go running back, so I decided to look it up. But to be honest, well, I don't know, feels a little bit of an unfair puzzle to me. Those shapes were pretty hard to identify.
Exactly,
the difference between them. So
that's probably the biggest problem, is that it's really hard to read what they are. I had just kind of run by them. I had taken a look at them. The other thing that was common in this area was there's a lot of non-interactable terminals.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, like, what's interactable in this space and what isn't, and what's important as a result. So it took me a long time to figure that puzzle out, and I spent a lot of time running back and forth. In fact, I didn't finish it on stream Saturday. I actually, the next morning, got up and played a couple hours more, and then I actually figured it out fairly quickly at that point. It also was fairly mazy, just because often the rooms or the corridors looked very similar. It's very hard to keep track of where you were.
Get lost easily. That's why I was dreading going backwards, to kind of go find them all and to remember what they were. But it's the only thing I looked up, so I felt like it was a little harder than it needed to be, so I felt a little justified. But yeah, full admission on the podcast that I looked that one up. Yeah,
I figured you might have. And that was why when I texted you, I was like, this next section is a little bit tricky. And then what I like about all this is that despite the puzzles or whatever, you finally get to a boss battle with Rictus, which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty fair. You have to use lots of distance attacks for a long time, and then so I was glad I had Democratus along, because they have a ranged weapon, and of course so does Sly. Stiletto, who was my third party member, was pretty useless in this whole section. She has no powered up weapons. She has what her starting kit is, so that's frustrating. So it made all the combat slower. And then you go into this room, which I thought was all pretty funny, where you have all these different superheroes who've been captured, like the Incredibles, as if Syndrome had captured all the heroes in the Incredibles at once instead of one at a time. And you just go around and talk to them about their abilities, and there's lots of little interactions between them in terms of, this one's checking out Stiletto. For me, there was one who was like checking out Stiletto, which I thought was really funny. And he was, at one point you can get the mental power of one of the heroes, like he touches you and you get his special power, which is that he can read minds. And so you're walking around, and this one guy is like, she's looking at me. No, I can't let her see that I'm looking at her. And I mean, it's just like fawning over Stiletto. So that was kind of funny. But then there's a bunch of stuff with that, and that ends in an entirely unexpected way. Why don't you take it from there?
Well, I was going to say one thing I was really impressed with the puzzling in this room is they did a good job thinking to themselves, okay, we have a room full of any superhero we want and that we can make up, and we can really lean into the fact that they're superheroes as a way to have fun solving the puzzles that you need to solve in the room. So they put in a mentalist, so that, that teaches you gives you the power to read minds. And so they make that a part of the puzzle. They have a dog superhero who obviously can't speak, but you could read their mind. And so you kind of need to you need to use those two together. And then they have an invisible character there, which of course you can't find unless you can talk to the dog to tell, because he has a better sense of smell than anyone else, and so he knows where the invisible, and that's also how you get the code, because you can read minds. So it was just a nice little puzzle logic there based on superhero fiction and lore, and just having fun with it. It was just a nice little way to end.
It was a super fun room to just walk around, and I was just chuckling the whole time. And of course, they basically beef up, which is a good choice of words, I guess. The final superhero you're going to meet, who is like a strong guy, right? I mean, so what do they call them in comics parlance? But he's basically a
strength. You mean
strength? Yeah, strength hero.
Super strength. Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay, we're going to get out of this by him punching a giant hole in the wall, because he's like called the fist or whatever. He'll punch a big hole in the wall and we'll all get out of here, and we can move on, get our ship back, whatever, and continue. But that's not what happened.
No. And it's like, man, talk about fully committing to Democratus as a planet. Like, they're basically about to be sucked out into space because the airlock alarm has gone off. What was it called? Emergency parole maneuver or something.
Right.
That's the button. Emergency parole, and basically all that means is they suck all the people in prison into space. So almost all of them die except you and the Fist are in this last final room, and the air, the force field's about to open, so you get sucked out. But then the Democratus, council makes a final quick vote unanimously, and they decide to become big again and go back to their full size right at the last minute, saving everybody from being sucked out into space. I guess the ship just disintegrates at that point, right? I don't know.
I would think so. You don't really want a planet to suddenly grow extremely large from inside of you.
Amazing, though. It's like taking these little, sometimes little, and then becomes big ideas that they have, and just going full on with them. And it's like, what could we do with this planet? Well, of course, we have to make it big again at an important moment and save everybody's life. But then this whole section ends for us, where, because they did that, all of the party members are spread around the surface of Democratus. So that's where we ended. We're now on the surface of Democratus, Sly by himself, and we'll talk about that more next time. But he's alone because everyone apparently is spread around the planet because it expanded. Democratus, the best character.
It's just
And,
nuts.
yeah.
All right. Well, let's. We've gone a long time here in the first section. Let's take a real quick break. We'll come back. We have just a few pieces of feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We have a few pieces of feedback. I actually wanted to throw a piece of feedback out there. Over break, we had a tweet from Rob Howard of the Grid Snaps podcast. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to this.
I still haven't. No, I haven't. I have it saved off. But
this is from Rojo Games on Twitter. He shot us a tweet at Dev Game Club talking about doing a short episode on his podcast, Grid Snaps, of discussing Republic Commando. A lot about the level design, some of the design elements of the game, very little about the technology, but that's okay. That's okay. I understand. It was fun. It was a fun listen, and I had a lot more time to listen to podcasts because I drove up and back to New Hampshire, so I had many hours in the car over break, and I had a chance to listen to it. So I wanted to thank Rob for forwarding that on. If you go search through our mentions, I guess you would find that I will also put it in the show notes, a link to that. But yeah, fun to listen to that and to listen to somebody
Cool.
talk about our game, the last game we made together. So I guess we'll go from there to email. You can send email to us at devgameclub@gmail.com. Take it away.
So this one's about the Electoral College from Ben Zog.
Yes.
That's a cool name.
We heard from him twice before.
Okay. Par for the course.
This is Ben from Iowa.
My memory is not good, as you know, audience. I've never heard of this game you're playing, but it sounds crazy in an amazing way. It is, as you heard for this session today about Democratus itself. I'm enjoying your podcast about it a lot. In Votown, you guys talked about it discussing social commentary around 2001. Tim brought up the thought about the Electoral College, and in the end decided maybe he thought that way due to recent wounds. Oh, how we forget. In 2000, in the 2000 election, Al Gore won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College due to a very tight Florida race. Just wanted to reinforce Tim's thoughts a bit since the timing for this game works out. Yes. Yep, that's what it was.
Yep. I felt particularly bad.
The thing is Jen and I just recently had talked about that multiple times, so I feel bad now too because it totally makes sense. It happened twice. Good for us.
Yep. That was one that I when I got that email, I literally replied immediately saying, "Oh my God, how could we have missed that?" And I did the big V8 bonk on the head. I feel like, and that's why I mentioned earlier in this episode that there are probably other things in here that were very topical.
Yeah, very timely game.
That maybe, although the satire or whatever is not hitting its specific mark, you can still feel the remnants of it, even if you can't remember the specifics. So I felt like you pretty well nailed that. You just couldn't. Neither one of us could come up with that specific incident. I can't believe we missed that. So thank you, Ben from Iowa. We appreciate that. I've got one here from Logan Brown. Says lore question. So already lore question.
Okay.
Not directed towards me. Hi guys. So this question is primarily for Tim and the Halo series, but I'm sure Brett has also had plenty of experience with this issue. I recently read Jason Schreier's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels and found myself wondering, in the chapter on Halo Wars, how big studios manage increasingly shaggy lore issues. I've wondered this for years in relation to comic books and long-running franchises, for example, Star Trek. But as franchising itself depends more and more on hyperdiegetic, hyperdiegetic, big word there, Logan, hyperdiegetic lore-fueled universes, how do writers and designers keep all this together? Are employees that sign on to write or design Halo 6 just handed a 300-page dossier and a 3-ring binder? Are writers expected to then essentially proofread each other's work to ensure lore fidelity? It seems that after 16 years, still less than Star Trek's 50, say, that would be a lot of information to check against. Sorry this is so long. Hey, no worries. Love the decision to do Anachronox, by the way, a game I was only dimly aware of prior to you taking it up on the cast. Thanks for the pods, Logan. So 2 things there. Wow, hyperdiegetic. And I'll also echo Jason Schreier's Blood, Sweat, and Pixels is a good book. I recommend it. He sent me a copy pre-release, but I think it was basically finally proofed, and it was quite good. So lots of stories of game development, and I know that's enticing to our audience. You can pick it up on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. Anyway.
Yeah.
You want to tackle that first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's really one good answer to this. And in my experience, when really I've only worked with established IPs, I've never worked on an original IP game. So that's everything from Indie to Tomb Raider to Star Wars to Halo. So I've been lucky to work with those. But each
Indiana Jones.
Jones, sorry. And so it's good and bad because, like he says, it comes with sort of a baggage to it, right? Where you want to actually leverage that franchise work. But how many, most of the time, and I will say how 343 deals with it, which is all public knowledge, and also to some degree, Lucasfilm does this on a bigger scale. There are things that people read and can read when they come in. We don't typically require people to know everything to come and work here because it's good to have fresh perspectives on things, but we do want it to be accurate. And what the solution has ended up being is we actually have a department that is devoted to doing it and to making sure that things stay straight. So we do have experts at 343, and Lucasfilm has experts there as well who are the keepers of the lore. And it is their job to not necessarily work directly on the games or on the properties, usually never really completely like on a given team. Their job is to make sure anybody working with the franchise is accurate. And that's all they do. Literally, that's their job. It'd be impossible for every single person on the team, especially, everybody, but it'd be even impossible for all the writers to be in the know. So they have this department at their disposal to answer questions and to make sure that everything's kosher. So
yeah, we had that back at LucasArts as well, originally in the person of Hayden Blackman, who now leads Hangar 13, and Mafia 3 was their game a year or two ago. And I bring up Hayden because he actually was the guy who knew everything, because he had written the Star Wars Encyclopedia CD-ROM, and he was called, I believe, the content coordinator, the Star Wars content coordinator at LucasArts, and later that position was filled by Ryan Kaufman, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I feel like he did it later. And after Hayden had been doing Star Wars, the MMO, Galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we dealt with it at LucasArts. At Bethesda, it's more that the designers are basically the repository of all things having to do with the Elder Scrolls. It doesn't go back nearly as far. There isn't a separate department. If they mess it up, there is an in-fiction reason for that, which is called a dragon break. Which is something like, I mean, because you also have to rectify the fact that the players may make different choices in how the story lines resolve in an individual game, but then the next story might assume that the universe went one way rather than another, and you have to deal with that fact, right? Because they're open world games that you can make a lot of decisions in terms of how you resolve the stories. So they call that a dragon break, and it has to do with, I guess, dragons being powerful, magical, whatever creatures. It's also in development when the game would crash, which happened very infrequently. I would pop open a dialogue whose title was Dragon Break, and it would send email to the programmers saying the game crashed here, etc. So I actually incorporated that into our tools.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's a thing. But yeah, typically it's a handful of people who have the knowledge.
Well, and one of the other really important aspects for a department like that people don't always think about, because we usually just kind of think about and focus on the games themselves. A big property like Halo, Tomb Raider to some degree, Star Wars, of course, and maybe less so for Elder Scrolls, but it's growing. The department also would be in charge of keeping licensees right out there, because a lot of other people use the Halo property that are not the game team. Whether it be a book or whether it be a calendar, it could be anything, right? And so it goes beyond just that. So you do get to a point where if you're licensing that stuff out, you actually need somebody who can spend full-time job, multiple people, interfacing with those other groups.
Right, absolutely. If you're going to make a toy or whatever,
it hasn't quite gotten there yet, but they're starting to. So with online and card game and stuff. So,
yep, definitely true. All right, I think. After that, we just have a review, which I think I sent to you. Did I send to the review?
I have a review, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yep. Okay. Take the review.
The highlight of my commute by Tosh.
Yeah, I think T. Shokunbi, maybe?
T. Shokunbi, yeah. T. Shokunbi. We'll go with that. Brett and Tim bring me joy when they play through some of my most cherished games from the perspective of seasoned video game developers. Their insights bring new life to games I've played many times over. The best thing about the podcast is it's timeless. You can visit previous episodes as easily as the latest and get just as much enjoyment. It also serves as a more insightful video game book club. For people interested in video games, this is a must listen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, T.
Slash whatever you are.
I like that note in that we do definitely, since we're playing these older games, it is possible to join at any point and then just pick and choose from the games you'd most like to play along and
totally
play at your pace. We certainly love to have people listening consistently every week. But I will say that when I look at the stats, there are still plenty of people starting off with the podcast and are listening to our first series of System Shock 2. And it's not hundreds, but it's a couple of few dozen each month, listening to those first few episodes, and they just keep going. So yeah, it's great. If you're going to play along, well, we're going to do the show. And we've done the episodes already. You can take it at your own pace and just play as far as you want. We put in the show notes how far we're playing to next time, and so you can play along
in any order, really. Too. It's nice that people are starting from the beginning, but start on a game that you're familiar with or that you're interested in.
Yep. So yeah, glad to have new listeners or people who are joining at different points along the way. I guess on that topic, we can talk about what's next, and that is we're going to finish this game, right? That's the next jump.
Yep, such as it is. I don't know how far we'll get into saving the universe, but we've already saved multiple universes with the save game system. So
that's true. I've saved dozens personally, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And it saves an awful lot of autosaves as well. So we've been automatically saving the universes we've been going as well.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good feature built in
saving of the universe. It's a very heroic saving system.
Yeah.
So we'll finish the game. I will probably stream it again this coming weekend. So whatever day that is, I have lost track of what day it is. So the 6th, I will probably jump on. You can find that on the Dev Game Club Twitter. I usually just post there because I don't want to poke any people who follow me for other reasons on my main account. But you can find me there, and I will do that. Normally I do it around noon Eastern Standard Time. So if you want to put that on your calendar, and then Twitch will archive it for however long it archives it, and then it will, I guess, be gone. I'm not putting these up on the YouTube channel or anything like that. But it's a fun time. I get a handful of people watching and commenting in the chat channel, and I read those and discuss questions that come up as we play, whether or not they're about this game, other games I've worked on, or game development generally, or even just, hey, what'd you do for your Christmas break? So feel free to stop by. I'm not making that a big feature of the podcast, but I am going to try to do more of it in the coming year. Not really a resolution, like I said, but you might see more of it. That's about all we've got this time. You can shoot those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com, and we love to have each and every review. And we read all of this stuff on the podcast, so we're really glad to have it. We're not blowing smoke. It really keeps us going. So thank you for those who did write this time. And in the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville, him at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
The podcast is, as I mentioned it, at Dev Game Club. Thanks so much, and good night.
Good night.